How did we end up here? I've lost count at how many times I've asked myself that question. This is supposed to be Carolina basketball. It was a patented brand of basketball I fell in love with back in middle school, where Sean May grabs it, Raymond Felton pushes it, and Marvin Williams slams it home before I could even blink and process what was happening. How could I hardly recognize something that I had watched so many times before, where the uniforms and the atmosphere are the only things that feel familiar? Trying to make sense of it schematically first, you have two players starting that teams don't respect as outside threats. Because of that, opponents collapse into the paint and take away driving lanes from your highest usage rate player, who becomes almost exclusively an inefficient shooter at that point, trying to save them. Your big has next to no lift to play above the rim and struggles with feel around the basket, which makes it tougher to play through him. And then you have an undersized guard that can become a defensive liability late. Combine that with minimal bench production due to an erratic rotation, and that's what North Carolina was trying to overcome this year. The results are in, and they were definitive. We looked past any weaknesses because we saw last year's magical run and wanted to believe that's who UNC was, because that's who UNC has always been. Even if the expectations were inflated, they weren't this. From talking to people around the program, the sense I get is that this team, since the summer, thought they would walk their way back to the national title game, and barring a miracle, they'll be the first team in the modern era to start a season as the preseason number one to miss the tournament completely. That's a failure on your leadership collectively, when your sense of urgency, intensity, and fight consistently comes into question, with each passing game feeling like the last specks of sand falling to the bottom of the metaphorical hourglass that was the season. In college, if you have four upperclassmen, multi-year starters that played in a Final Four together, they should be able to will their team to at least a top 25 ranking, regardless of who is coaching them. Yet when your season is this colossal of a failure, the coaching staff isn't without blame either. They have failed to develop a bench in 2 straight seasons, instead relying on a group that doesn't have complementary skill sets, while letting some players have too much freedom within an offense that had no identity. The developmental department is crucial to the college game, and to me, there wasn't a player on Carolina's roster that you can point at and say they were noticeably better than last year. It's an inexperienced coaching staff trying to find their way. I'm of the belief that when you made this decision to go with Coach Davis, in turn, he deserves the opportunity to bring in guys that he envisions fitting his system, that he can build the right culture around. But if you don't, because this is still a top 5 job in all of college basketball and think it should have been treated as such, honestly, I get that too. As attention turns to the offseason, I'm expecting heavy roster turnover and for Carolina having to be active in the portal to totally revamp next year's roster. Looking at UNC's history with it the past 2 years doesn't inspire much confidence for identifying and being able to land the needed talent with 3 misses and then Brady Manick. And then there's the added challenge of having to re-recruit players already on your roster that you might not have shown trust in this year. After one of the most improbable runs in last year's tournament, the most disappointing season in college basketball history now belongs to the Tar Heels, which is almost unthinkable to say, but at the same time completely believable for those that watched how this season played out. From the Greensboro Coliseum, I'm Taylor Vippolis, signing off for Inside Carolina.